Last time we talked about all the prep work that's going into my game. Today will be a slightly less sexy topic. I know you all want to see models and animations and coding and such, but unless there is a good game design direction for those things to go in, those don't really matter. So these last few weeks I've been working on putting down all my ideas for the game, what boss fights should be like, and what the enemies around those boss fights should do. And I want to take you through that process before we start going back into Unity to code all of this up. Fair warning, these notes are hand-drawn and handwritten, so they do look pretty bad. But I'm sure you guys will be fine. Okay, so, as I said before, there's going to be 6 boss fights, but that was kind of a lie. Because that didn't include the tutorial boss. You see, we'll start playing the game with a basic sword, learning to use our movement abilities like the dash for combats and a little platforming, learn about your lock-on system and so on. And of course, this little section also requires having a boss fight. This boss doesn't reward you with a weapon, since the weapon tied to it is the one you get at the beginning of the game. But after beating it, you're now in the middle of the open world map and you're free to roam around and fight the real bosses in any order you like. So let's go over the bosses and their weapons. As you can see on the map, they're all color coded with a little X under them, indicating which weapon will be strong against which boss. For example, the shield boss will be weak against the hammer, since the hammer will be able to break through its defenses very easily. This already requires me to adjust the combat system to include a guard stat, along with defense and HP, to create a difference between a hammer and other high damaging weapons. Good thing I figured that out before jumping into deeper development, eh? Alright, let's go through these one at a time. The sword and the tutorial boss. Alright, the basic sword itself has a 3-hit combo. I did consider making a proximity based combat system like a game such as Kingdom Hearts has, as it makes the combat feel much more satisfying, but that would rather defeat the purpose of having these different weapons. And if I were to, say, automatically switch you from weapon to weapon depending on what the situation would require, that would take half the fun out of the gameplay too. So every weapon will instead just have a basic repeating combo with a certain number of attacks. The basic sword also doesn't have any very special attack, it'll just do 2 full combos at the press of a single button, maybe with a slight damage increase. The boss for this section is the tutorial boss, and if it wasn't obvious yet, for the main gameplay loop of the game, Kingdom Hearts was a big source of inspiration. So it only seems right to make this fight an homage to the dark side battle. It'll have a couple of attacks, like raining down dark attacks from the sky, aiming one specific projectile at the player, or spawning enemies. Its main attack though is what I like to call the dark side punch, where it goes in for a punch on the ground and it gets its hand stuck, allowing you, the player, to hit it. Because it's going to be so huge, its feet won't be able to be damaged. Every boss will also have a basic enemy based on it. For this boss, that's the enemy we've seen before. It doesn't have any fancy attacks, but the normal attacks foreshadow the hand getting stuck in the ground, which also makes them really easy to deal with for the player, since this is the tutorial after all. Next up we have the hammer. This boss's main move will be to smash the hammer in front of him on the ground, which will then send a number of flying boulders through the sky. So even if you don't get hit by the first smash, you'll still have to avoid that danger. It's also got a quick swing of the hammer, probably a left and right combo variation. And it can also do a quick series of smashes around itself that'll then start making rocks fall down from the ceiling for a little while. And I figured I might as well give him a 360 spin attack too. The enemy version will show off the main attack, that being the small AoE attack that makes the rocks fly around. But since there will be a lot more of these little enemies than the one big boss fight, these rocks won't actually hurt you. They're just meant to tie them back into the themes of the boss fight. Once you unlock the weapon for yourself, its combo will be the simple swings of the boss fight. And its special ability will be the AoE smash, which will make rocks fly through the air. And all that, of course, since it's a hammer with very high knockback. The scythe. This has to be one of my favorites, I think. The main attack is a 360-degree spin attack. This is also the attack that you'll unlock once you gain the weapon for yourself. It's very nice for crowd control. For this one, however, I didn't give the main ability to the enemy variations, because that seemed a little bit too chaotic, and frankly, probably wouldn't be a lot of fun. Instead, the enemy version will just have a normal slashing attack, with the twist being they can hit each other. I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sold on this idea yet, so that is open to still change. Back to the boss though. It's also got a slashing projectile, a wide crescent-shaped attack that can be used at range. But it'll also have an attack where it vanishes and reappears at one of a preset amount of points in the boss arena, and then dashes towards you and slashes at you. Out of all the things I've written so far, I'm actually looking forward most to putting this into the game. The axe boss fight. I named him Axel because he has an axe. I'm very clever like that, aren't I? This one and the next one I had some trouble coming up with fun and original ideas. I mean, I still have a special attack where it hits the ground with an AoE attack, but rather than it being a circle, it'll be a strip in front of him. Which will also be the special attack for this weapon when the player uses it. But aside from that, I'm giving him a 3-hit basic combo attack and a 360-degree spin attack. Which makes a lot of sense for this weapon, but also makes a special attack from the Reaper Scythe boss just a little bit less special. Then he also has an attack where he throws his axe at you. The funny thing here though is that he will have to go pick it up. So as long as he doesn't have his weapon, you're absolutely safe to go to town on him. Maybe once I start playtesting this, it'll become clear that we'll need to give him a simple punch attack or something like that, so he can't be cheesed too bad, but I really like this idea. And the same will hold true for the smaller enemy versions. They'll be throwing their axes at you, which might sound like a pain, but they'll spend most of the time actually going to try and pick up those axes. And while that isn't the initial idea for the mechanics for the weapon itself, I think it does link back the boss-enemy relationship the best out of all the pairs in the game. The spear, honestly, this probably is one of the most basic weapons and one of the most basic bosses in the game. Certainly the one that I intend the player to go after first, being up north in the map and having less combat abilities than the rest. His special move is one where he jumps up into the air and lands on top of the player character. This also of course is what the player will be able to do once you gain the weapon. It'll teleport you to the enemy that you're currently locked onto, and then jump on top of them with the spear. Aside from that, the boss can do a normal attack where he stabs you with the spear, which has a long range, and one attack where he throws a spear, which, much like the axe enemy, you will have to go pick up afterwards. The enemy versions of this boss will just be simple and hard to deal with because they'll be hard to hit, having much longer range with their attacks than any other enemy in the game. Aside from obviously the axe throwing enemies, which have ranged attacks, but we've already gone over why they have a different weakness. The dual swords.
Raxus!
Hey, who said that? This is also here because of Ahsoka, I'll have you know, thank you very much, and Zuko. Anyhow, the most original idea ever, splitting this boss up into two different entities. Each a mirror of each other, light and dark, left and right, you get the point. They do share an HP bar though, so they still are very much one boss fight. Their main attack will just be a quick flurry of attacks, potentially one that they fuse into a combined form for, I'm not entirely sure on that yet. They also have some normal attacks. Then they have what I like to refer to as their ping pong attack, where they will hit you with the knockback being calculated to hit you towards the other half. And a variation to that is an attack where they'll both dash towards each other's places. If you, as a player, get caught in that, you'll be in for a world of hurting. As for the enemies based on this boss, this is really the only one where I couldn't come up with a halfway decent idea how to make the enemies not too overpowered but still have them be like the boss fight. So my solution is just have a metric fuckton of small weak enemies to symbolize the fact that these weapons can deal a lot of very small attacks very quickly. Which of course is the case when you have the weapons for yourself too, with the base combo being a quick 6-hit combo, and the special attack being just a longer, I'm thinking 10 hit, combo that ends with an attack that'll ignore guard and defense stats. It won't break the guard like the hammer does, but it will pierce through it. And finally we have the shield. The last boss has to be one of the hardest in the game. You'll need to be able to deal a ton of damage to brute force your way through, or have the hammer, because this enemy will have a lot of defensive abilities. The first one being the main mechanic, a block which gathers all the damage that you've dealt to it while it's guarding, and then deals it back to you. An ability that you can also use yourself once you obtain this weapon. Then it's got an ability where it creates a shield bar to protect its HP bar, like you might be familiar with from some other games. If your damage output is low, this will take you so long that'll likely be a huge waste of your time. And as if that isn't bad enough, he can also sit down to heal himself. You can stop this if you manage to break his guard, but again, without the hammer, that's gonna be painful. And the last attack is the reason that you'll want to go in with more than just 1 or 2 different weapons. He can sit down, become invincible, and spawn a random wave of enemies you have to take out before the boss fight can go on. These can be any enemy type of any part of the game. Much like the boss fights, the enemies themselves will need to have their guard broken before they can be killed. These ones though will not do normal attacks against you, so they should be a decent way to grind some experience. And on top of all that, both the boss fights and the basic enemy variation will also have a very high defense stat. Feel free to rewatch all of that if you want. It's a lot of information, and not all of it makes a lot of sense without having the full context of what each weapon does that you do have now. Long story short though, I expect that for skilled players, the shield will end up being the best weapon for the most part, working as a potentially more powerful version of the reflect spell that you have in Kingdom Hearts 2, which, now that we're talking about Kingdom Hearts again, yes, the scythe is just a fire spell, and the spear, while being different, is certainly inspired by the thunder spell and the way you can hit enemies at more or less any range as long as you have them on lock-on. All of these spells use your MP in one way or another, something that you'll have to share with your heal spell. So if you're in need of healing, it'll reduce you to basic attacks. But at the same time, those basic attacks are what refill your MP meter. And other things from the Kingdom Hearts series that I stole. Got inspired by. You see, while I get that the way the modern MP systems work in Kingdom Hearts is probably less confusing, the idea of having to work for your magic points, and that there's a back and forth in the gameplay between using magic, or in my case, special attacks, and your basic combat, makes it feel way more engaging than just waiting for your MP bar to reload. So I'm 100% going that route for this game. All this being planned out now is giving me a clearer idea of what parts of the combat system still needs to be changed and refined before I can move on, as well as giving me a much clearer roadmap for development. So once I've made a few changes to the code for the game, we're going to be building the game itself in vertical slices, one boss, enemy and weapon pack at a time, starting with the basic default sword and dark side boss. So do subscribe to the channel if you want to see me try, fail and try again, and hopefully at some point succeed in making that in the next part. And thanks to my patrons, you can see them on screen right now, and a special thank you to my Cave Digger tier Patreon, Syntax.